Okay, so that's 11 o'clock, so I think I'll get started. And there just might be people trickling in and out. That's fine. So my name's Lucy Brady. I'm a GIS analyst in the Spatial Data Management Group of the GIS unit at North Carolina Department of Information Technology Transportation. And today I'm going to be talking about the Metadata Cookbook. So I have to be honest, the Metadata Cookbook isn't actually the title that I came up with for this presentation. The title I came up with, which is the name of the document that I'll be talking about today, was the North Carolina State and Local Government Guide for Creating and Editing Metadata with Esri Arc Catalog. Now, my manager, she's here in the audience. She didn't think that anyone would come to that presentation, so we went with Metadata Cookbook instead. And actually, that's a really great way to think about this document. It is like a recipe book or a cookbook for taking you through the process of creating good metadata. So I just have this little expectations and reality graphic here just to illustrate sometimes our different expectations around metadata, whether that be metadata that we create or a vendor creates or another agency creates, and then maybe what our reality looks like a little bit. So if your metadata looks more like the reality batch of cookies, this could be a good guide for you. So just as a little bit of history, a bit of background here, back in 2012, the Statewide Mapping Advisory Committee, or SMAC, chartered an ad hoc metadata committee whose role is to recommend ways to expand and improve geospatial metadata in North Carolina that are efficient for the data producer and benefit data users in the discovery and application of geospatial data. So one of the main deliverables of that ad hoc committee to date has been the North Carolina State and Local Government Metadata Profile for Geospatial Data and Services. Throughout the rest of this presentation, I'll just be referring to that as the profile, just so I don't have to say that long thing every time. And the profile is really the statewide metadata standard. It sets the rules around metadata and defines what metadata elements are and if they're required or recommended. So the document that I'm discussing today just kind of takes that one step further. The profile gives you the rules, and the guide gives you how to apply the rules. So before I get too far into it, I just want to quickly acknowledge the current ad hoc metadata committee members and advisors. A lot of these people are here this week, quite a few of them in the room here even. So over the coming days, feel free to approach these people and chat to them about any kind of metadata questions or concerns that you have. Okay, and just if you haven't ever accessed the profile before, if you go to NC1 Map, there's a little metadata folder. If you click on that, you're able to access the current version of the profile. And for people who were here in the last session, they know that that's what the front page of the profile looks like. Okay, now I just want to address the difference between Arc Desktop and Arc Pro just quickly. So this guide is based on Arc Desktop, specifically Arc Catalog, and I'm actually anticipating that in the next version of this guide, we address Arc Pro directly, because we know a lot of people are already using that as their primary GIS solution. So fortunately though, in the kind of editing context, there aren't too many differences. It's just when you get to importing and exporting XML files, that functionality, how to access that has changed slightly, and also how to select a metadata style, sometimes referred to as a metadata style sheet. That has changed a little bit as well. So that's just something to bear in mind. And as I said, in the next version of this document, we hope to have something to address Arc Pro. So onto the ingredients, also known as the table of contents. We have an introduction and acknowledgement section, a section on viewing metadata, selecting a metadata style sheet, editing metadata. This is really probably the most powerful part of the document. as it really does take you through the ARC catalog menus and submenus at the element level and explains how to populate those different elements. Next up, we have exporting metadata to an XML file, and then finally importing metadata from an XML file. So step one, how do we view metadata? That's probably the thing that most of us do on the most regular basis. So this section just takes you through how to navigate to a shapefile or a feature class and view the associated metadata. So very straightforward, but a very common thing that we would need to do. Next, we have selecting a metadata style. So the metadata style just dictates what elements are available to be populated. The default metadata style in ARC catalog is one called item description, and that's just a very limited, or yeah, I guess limited is the best word to describe it. There are only a few elements there that you can populate, and that's not the one that we want to use. We want to use the ISO 19139 metadata implementation specification, because that gives us a wide range of elements that we're able to populate and kind of be in line with the North Carolina profile. So once we have that ISO 19139 metadata implementation specification set, the following menus are available. So we have the overview menu, the metadata menu, and the resource menu. The next important thing in this editing metadata section of the document are the crosswalk tables, and I'll get to those in a little moment. The next kind of thing that's good about this editing section is we're constantly calling out elements that are recommended or required by the profile. So I guess the reason that I'm calling out title here is we have these software-generated metadata elements also that come up. So ARC Catalog will be really smart and take the name of your shapefile or your feature class and try to use that as the title in the metadata. And that doesn't really work out very well because we have this requirement in the profile to have a descriptive, unique name and convey the nature of the data. We need to be addressing what, where, and when, and then we need to be avoiding abbreviations and acronyms. So I don't know about you, but my shapefiles and feature classes, I like a good acronym. So I would need to make sure to go back and change that. So just be aware of those software-generated metadata elements. It sounds like they're going to be helpful, but they kind of can trip you up. Okay, as I mentioned, the crosswalk section of the document. These are kind of quick reference tables that show you what's required, what's recommended, how to refer to them in the profile, and then it also ties a little bit of different terminology that we have between the profile and then what's present in ARC Catalog. So an example of this is the metadata element use limitation in ARC Catalog. In the profile, that's described as use constraint. So we have these different terms, and the crosswalks just help marry those terms together because it is a little bit confusing. So just looking at one of the crosswalks here, this is from the document. You can see in that far left for you guys, in that far left side, we're in the overview menu. Then the submenu that we're in is item description. Down the center, we have the ARC Catalog metadata elements, and then over closest to me, the North Carolina profile metadata element and page number. So I'm just seeing here another one of those discrepancies between the terminology used by ARC Catalog and then in the profile. So it's thumbnail in ARC Catalog, and then in the profile it's called browse graphic file name, and then in parentheses thumbnail. So these tables just help kind of marry those things together. Another thing to just call out on this page are the page numbers next to the metadata element names from the profile. So you're always able to go back to the profile if you need more context or more information. Okay, this is what the bulk of the document looks like. It's currently like over 100 pages long, and that's because we've tried to include a lot of pretty pictures, or semi-pretty pictures, I would say. We have a screenshot of the item description submenu there, and then down the right-hand side are text boxes, just with a description of how those metadata elements need to be populated. So that's just a bit more of a close-up look of what's included there. You can see we're calling out the required and recommended elements as well here. So it just kind of draws your eye and lets you know what you need to be doing. And those are our required and recommended symbols. So the reason that I've got this up here is the profile really should be the baseline of the metadata that you're completing. And then on top of that, your agency might decide that they require additional things on top of that. So for example, at DOT, we require that the thumbnail be the Department of Transportation seal, and we also require the use of tags. So just bear that in mind, that you're able to kind of customize as needed. Okay, so for importing and exporting metadata, that's the kind of last two sections of the document. Some of the reasons that you would want to import and export metadata are, so for exporting metadata to an XML file, it might be in the circumstance where you're trying to publish metadata separately. So for example, in a metadata catalog. And then a reason for wanting to import metadata from an XML, it might be a number of associated data sets that all support the same project, that will have a shared range, I guess, of metadata elements. So that might be common contact information, or a common thumbnail, or a common set of tags. You can make that once, export that to an XML file as kind of like a metadata template, and then import that onto the various data sets that you would need to. So it kind of just saves you a little bit of duplicate work and hopefully a little bit of headache too. Okay, so just to kind of recap that, I guess. Exporting to an XML file, the process has changed a little bit in Arc Pro, so just be mindful of that. And then the uses are transferring metadata to a metadata catalog, or creating a metadata template. And then importing metadata from an XML file, a use would be applying a metadata template. And that has also changed a little bit in Arc Pro, how to access that functionality. Okay, so I have a little bit of a personal anecdote here. My mother-in-law has this really amazing family mac and cheese recipe, and she keeps telling me that she's going to give me a copy of it. And, you know, it's been in the family for 10 years now, and it just hasn't happened. So I'm going to give up. But in the case of the guide and this recipe, I would encourage you to share it. I think we've all experienced having a data deliverable with not great quality metadata come along with it, whether that be from a vendor or another agency. And we've either kind of let that go and maybe come to regret that decision later, or we've tried to have a bit of a review process, and that can take up a lot of time and sort of a lot of burden and overhead. So we want to avoid that as much as possible. We don't want to be the beautiful hedgehog at the bottom here with the lovely smile. I'm not sure what they were thinking. We want to kind of keep it looking good and help sort of educate people along the way. So how to access this guide? The hope and the intention is to have it published on NC1 Map in the next couple of weeks after the craziness of NCGIS has died down a little bit, so that we have the profile and the guide side by side for your reference. So for us, what's next? We'd be hoping to gather feedback from users. So over the next couple of weeks, definitely go check out NC1 Map to see the document. We'd love to know what you think works about it, what doesn't, what other information you might want to see incorporated. Any of that kind of information would be really helpful. Next up, we will be having training opportunities later in the year on the guide, so reach out for that as well, and we're happy to organise that, facilitate that with your organisation or your agency. As I've said a couple of times, we're planning on having an Arc Pro compatible version available. And then just in terms of the Ad Hoc Metadata Committee, their future initiatives, really the feedback that we get from this community will help drive those initiatives going forward. So with that in mind, I have some contact information here. So I'm just calling out Sarah. So feel free to send her all of your emails, all of your questions. Sorry, Sarah. And I have the link there to the Ad Hoc Metadata Committee website, which lists all the members and advisors. So really you can pick and choose who you want to hassle. But they'll also post upcoming meetings and minutes, that kind of thing there. And then I have my own contact information there in the bottom right. So I'll just leave that there. I'm aware that we've got lunch coming up. If anyone's got any questions now, I'm happy to answer them. If that's not your style and you'd rather just chat one-on-one, I'll be around for the next few days and happy to have that conversation. So thank you. Any questions before we... Okay, good. I did a really good job of explaining everything. Okay, thanks, guys. Thanks.